Two. Hello, Tom Levecki here with another special edition of the Armchair NBA. We're doing a series. This is part 2 with Myron Sugarman, dubbed as the last gangster, last Jewish gangster. I also think of him as the last gangster. He's a wealth of knowledge on the Irish mob, a wealth of knowledge on the Italian mob, and frankly, a smart business guy, author, entrepreneur, and a great father and grandfather. Myron, welcome back to the Armchair NBA. How you doing today, buddy?
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. How are you, Tom?
I'm well. We're gonna do a lot of things today and a lot to unpack. Talk a bit about how in the U.S. During World War II, the Jewish mob took care of Nazis and sympathizers here in the U.S. We're going to talk a little bit about the Italian mob, the Jewish mob again. But first, we're going to we asked for some viewers' questions, so we'll jump right in. Okay, Myron, this is from Eric. Who gave you the best advice that you integrated into your life? Time, place, and setting a conversation or a situation when you receive this advice. Thank you, Tom and Myron. So what's the best advice you received that you actually took, and give a little bit about the time, place, and setting of that conversation?
I'd have to give you 1,000 different times, places, and people, because it's not just one, it just doesn't come from one source. It comes from many, many sources.
Okay.
But if our friend Eric that asked that question was going to say, let's say, what was the most essential of all the advices that you gave, I would say that it would be from so many different sources, but the essential theme was be careful of being greedy. Greed kills more humans than bullets. Another great piece of advice is control your ego. Don't let your ego control you.
I like that.
If you can control your ego, you've been able to harness the greatest force on the face of the earth. However, if you can't control that ego, your ego is going to rule you and get you into some bad situations.
I see in business all the time, the number one destroyer of business is not maybe strategy or not the ability to execute on a strategy. It's often hubris. And that's when ego gets in the way. And I appreciate that answer. Okay. Next one. This is from Bruce City. Last interview, you had Mr. Sugarman. He stated, next discussion, you discussed the rise of anti-Semitism, which we will talk about a little bit. Let me just, I love this guy. He writes a lot. It's about a 500-word question. Well, I will summarize the question. Talk to us a little bit about why do you feel anti-Semitism may be on the rise again here in the U.S.?
That's a
loaded question. I know.
It's why is it on the rise in the United States? I don't know. I think that it accompanies. I think it has to do a lot with Israel. Yeah. When Israel first began, after post World War II, we were the David, and the others were the Goliath. We came out of the Holocaust, the Shoah. There was a sense of responsibility, guilt for the nation. Let the Jews have their own nation, and so forth. And we were pitied at that particular point in history. And I think probably because of that sympathy, pity, and guilt of the nations of the world that didn't do anything to lift a finger to protect the Jews, to provide us with refuge. So, okay, we'll give them a state. And we're not to worry too much about the Jews, because they won't be able to survive, right? In terms of Israel. Israel survived. Not only did Israel survive, 1967, 19 years after the creation of the state of Israel, Israel pulled off the greatest military victory beyond the 6-Day War. All of a sudden, as time continued, we no longer were the David, we became the Goliaths. And the world, I believe, for the most part, probably regretted the fact that they voted for the creation of the state of Israel.
Why do you think though? Yeah, why do you think? I know you're getting into it, but
Anti-Semitism has, if you were to ask the 100 different people, what's the reason you hate Jews? Each one has a different reason. They're arrogant, they superiority, this business about being the chosen people. They killed Jesus Christ, our Savior. The Muslims will say because it says so in the Koran that the Jews betrayed Muhammad. You have all kinds of excuses and reasons and so forth that the Jews are hated. Listen, it's probably one of history's greatest mysteries. What is the reason? What is the cause for anti-Semitism? World War I, there were 100 and some odd thousand Jews that actually fought for the Kaiser Wilhelm and for the Austro-Hungarian Empire. All right, part of the Axis against the Allied forces of World War I.
yes,
we won heroic medals fighting for the German Empire and for the Austro-Hungarian Empire. We shed blood for the empire, for both empires. We were heroic and we were loyal citizens of the. Now that was that war ended in 1918.
yeah.
All right. By the 1920s, you already had the rise of anti-Semitism, the rise of the National Socialist Party in Germany. And suddenly, Hitler was being reminded, but your Jews fought for the empire. And notwithstanding the fact that the Jews were loyal citizens to the German Empire and to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, we were hated. And a rise of anti-Semitism, part of the principle of the National Social, the Nazi movement, of course, Nazi is the acronym for National Socialist, was the extermination of the Jews.
Yeah.
All right, Tom, every reason, though, every anti-Semite, if you go to them and say to them, why do you hate the Jew? He'll give you a reason. There's hundreds of them. And are they logical? Are they sensible? Are they reasonable? Is there a basis for it, and so forth and so forth? I don't know. It's just.
But Myron,
now,
Myron, really quick. I don't mean to cut you off, but America and Europe have historically had different views of Israel. I've always felt that, well, depending who the president is, but for the most part, I always felt maybe America had maybe a more pro-Israeli stance, where I felt European Union was a bit more empathetic towards, the PLO, the Palestinians, etc. Would you agree with that statement? And if so, why is that?
The United States, at different times, according to different administrations, was pro-Israel. The most pro-Israel in the history, one of the most phenomenal leaders of entire history, as far as benevolence to the Jew, is Donald Trump.
I knew you were going to say that. Is that because he moved the what is it called? The
embassy.
The embassy. was that
one of that was significant, but there was much greater things that he did for the state of Israel than just moving the embassy. Yeah. For example, recognition of the sovereignty over the Golan Heights, over Judea, Samaria, of encouraging Jews to build Jewish homes on Jewish lands for Jewish people, and the masterful creation of the Abrahamic agreement, which now makes Israel partners in peace with the UAE, with Bahrain, with this, with Sudan, Sudan, and Sudan of all places,
Yeah. Would you ever think
and
in your life,
Morocco.
would you ever think in your lifetime you would have saw that?
Never. Trump is the greatest friend of the Jewish people from the time going all the way back to the one that was greatest of them all prior to Trump was Julius Caesar.
Interesting.
Because
That's a bold
Julius
sentence.
Caesar recognized the rights of the Jewish people. We mourned his death. We stayed at his grave for 30 days after he died.
Wow.
Donald Trump is without a doubt the greatest friend to the Jewish people. Here's something phenomenal, though, however, 80% of our Jewish people didn't vote for him, voted for Biden, not because they were in favor of Biden as president. They voted for Biden because they hate Donald Trump. Now, if you were to ask me, as you did, what's the cause of anti-Semitism? How do I explain Jewish hatred against a Jewish hero?
Interesting. Well, let me get to the next question. It was a chock full of information there. Go back to the mob stuff, and thank you for that. And I appreciate the expanded answer.
Well, tell that young man that asked that question. He asked an excellent question.
Yeah, he actually had a follow-up question. New York City continues to produce the most Italian and Sicilian mobsters in the USA. However, given their tight childhood and friendships, Philadelphia, under the dapper Joey Molino became the strongest mafia in the USA today, ? What do you think of Joey Molino, who doesn't really shy away from the media? Joey Molino, Philly guy, kind of like a junior John Gotti in a sense, whereas in the media, he's out there. He may or may not be running the show. Have you ever kind of dealt with people who dealt with him? What are your thoughts on Joey Molino?
Well, I don't know Joey Molino, but I think that it raises the other question that you and I spoke about before we got on the air is the difference in the era that I grew up in with a mob boss like Jerry Katina, which we'll get into, as compared to a mob boss like John Gotti. I don't know Mr. Molino. I have no connection. I haven't heard nothing and so forth. So I'm not going to talk about things that I don't know, but let's, for the basis, for purposes of this discussion, say that Joey Molino is a John Gotti type. Well, that's a difference in the era between the world that I grew up with around Abner Longis Willman, Meyer Lansky, Jerry Katina.
Got it. Okay, now, what do you think of the modern state of Cosa Nostra in the U.S., the Italian mob in the U.S. right now? What's kind of your thought on it?
I think that there'll always be a mob. All right, there'll always be a mob because the mob is there's always, let's say in Spanish, hecho la ley, hecho el truco. The government makes the law, and the wise guys figure out how to beat it. All right.
Yeah.
So that's just the way. That's just the way of the world. So there'll always be a mob. What the mob needs to do is to evolve in terms of knowledge, education, and so forth. It can no longer operate successfully and go into the future on the basis of muscle and intimidation and so forth. It must incorporate. It must make its men more up to date, more modern, and super educated. The better educated a human being is, the more skillful, the more successful.
Agreed. And then so it has to evolve. What about the Russian mafia? Tell us a little bit about, is the Russian mafia based in Tel Aviv, Israel? And what is that? Or is there a indigenous Jewish mafia, and how does it relate to the Russian mob?
Well, in Israel, your basic mobs in mobsters in Israel are families, actual families, brothers. There's a bunch of them, and as well, not only the Jewish mobs, but you have Arab mobs that cooperate with the Jewish mobs. One truth that Yasser Arafat said in all the years that he spoke, the one truth that he said is the only cooperation between Jews and Arabs are the Arabs who steal automobiles and the Jews who buy them. The student that. So they're from my particular point of view, they are very vicious.
Yeah.
Extremely vicious. All right. And remember another thing, they come out of the military.
Yes.
These guys are all conscripted into the military. So they've got some super duper training in terms of how to kill somebody. They're extremely vicious. Well, that's the reason why the Italian mob, what I've heard over the years, is that they import what they call zips. All right.
Yeah.
Guys from the other side who are homeland educated. All right. And so Israel has basically with what we would call zips.
Yeah.
All right. Now, when Meyer Lansky was deported from Israel because they feared that he was going to organize crime, Israel made a huge mistake. They should have let him organize crime. You wouldn't have disorganized crime.
Good point. Okay, so as far as you know, I my research has shown that there is an Israeli mob, different families and so forth, and they're very big in the MDMA ecstasy business, right? And that they also are involved here in the US on a smaller basis, but very quiet basis, that they own a lot of the market share of the ecstasy pills that come from Netherlands.
Yeah, they have no limitations as far as the old mob in the United States, of which I was born into and part of that culture. There were limits. Whereas as far as the Israelis are concerned, and the Sicilians and other ethnic groups, there's no limitations. Money is money, and that's we do it, and that's all there is.
Got it. Okay. So kind of change gears a little bit. We talked about Jerry Katina. I'm going to put the link below to the first.
Tom, let me just interrupt you. Go back to the Israeli mobs. Most of those guys, by the way, are not of the Ashkenazic. The Russians are the Ashkenazic mobsters, and they're pretty shrewd. They're the ones that came up with the gas racket that what's his name?
Francis.
Yeah, Michael Francis was involved in, but actually it was the Russian Jews that came up with the scheme.
Correct. So, okay. So we talked a little bit about Jerry Katina. The link's going to be above for Myron's first interview. So if you're enjoying this, check out the part one, either after this or pause and go back. Make sure you like and subscribe. Jerry Katina was a Genovese mobster operating in New Jersey for a number of years, retired in his own bed, very wealthy man, could have been, like you said, the president of the United States, Fortune 500 CEO. One question that kind of came to me after you and I spoke is, would Jerry Katina be a successful mobster today? And if so, why?
He wouldn't waste his time being a mobster. He would have been a businessman. He was an unwilling mob boss. He did not want to be the mob boss. He was inducted because his leadership was his brain power, his connections. He's the one that put the Valley deal together. I told that story to Michael Francis, not Michael Francis, to Patrick Bet-David, that it was Jerry Katina. I'm going to tell you something very fascinating. I share it with you and with your. It's long. I'm on safe grounds to tell the story. Abner Longie's Willman. Jerry Katina started out as a young man, really as a bodyguard for Abner Longie's Willman, or if not a bodyguard, I would say something like a a disciple. Abner Longys Wellman, Jerry Katina was so talented that in a way, he became equal with Longys Wellman, who was known as the Al Capone of the state of New Jersey. Since alcohol during the time of the Prohibition came into New Jersey under his rule. Jerry Katina was, I don't know if the right way to express it would be that he was an inch under the leadership of Abner Longys Wellman. However, when Mr. Wellman died February 1959, of course, the great story or the tragic story is, did he actually hang himself or was he hung by others?
Yeah.
The question was, if he was hung by others, who was responsible for it? So, of course, the rumor over the years was that it was Jerry Katina that was responsible for the death of Abner Longys Wellman. My father, may he rest in peace, was partners with Jerry Katina. So my father's position was he committed suicide. For very logical reasons, my father never broke from that particular position. He was partners with Mr. Katina in Runyon Sales Company, which was a large jukebox, cigarette machine, gaming operation in New Jersey. Mr. Katina was at the office every day. I grew up with Mr. Katina since I'm 7 years of age. Mr. Katina, here's an incredible story. In 1970, September 1970, I was in Israel and I would stay at the old Sheraton Hotel in Tel Aviv. Mr. Doc Stacher, who was the equal partner with Longys Wellman during the Prohibition days, had negotiated a deal with Robert Kennedy to accept exile from the United States in exchange for dropping charges against him for income tax evasion. Your listeners can look up the name Joe Doc Stacher. They'll get the entire story. Mr. Stacher quietly was on an equal level with Abner Longys Wellman. Mr. Stacher, Doc Stacher, was the original partner of my father in that jukebox gaming business. Mr. Katina bought out his share in 1946 when Mr. Stacher left for California to build and to operate the Moulin Rouge nightclub, and then eventually ended up at the, not at the Flamingo, at the Sands Hotel Casino. He was one of the partners. He was one of the major partners, and he had tremendous influence as far as the mob was concerned. He was extreme close to Meyer Lansky. That was equal. You had four guys that were the powerhouses. It was Doc Stacher, Longys Wellman, Meyer Lansky, Benny Siegel.
Yeah.
Right. You had other guys as well. You had Dutch Schultz, you had Lepke Buchhalter, you had Waxy Gordon, you had others. But really the essence of leadership was Abner Longys Wellman and Meyer Lansky. In fact, in 1940, 47, 48, when the Jews, the Zionists, were aspiring to create the Jewish nation, the Zionists went to Longys Wellman and to Meyer Lansky to seek their cooperation, to get the cooperation of the longshoremen to ship contraband weaponry to Israel, to Palestine, to pre-state Israel, to both Haganah and to Irgun, which were the two military operations.
Was U.S. government involved on that, low key, or
U.S. government was against the law. Truman made a great contribution for the creation of the state of Israel by recognizing it 20 minutes after David Ben-Gurion on May 14th, 1948, declared the state of Israel. But almost immediately, he invoked what was known as the Neutrality Act, which made it a criminal act to supply weapons and arms to Palestine, to either the Jews or the Arabs. So we had a mass operation of Jewish cooperation in the United States to help the Zionists ship weapons and arms, surplus weapons and arms from World War II to Palestine. All right. We needed the longshoremen. Who controlled the longshoremen?
The mob.
Frank Costello and Albert Anastasia. So they went to Meyer Lansky and to Longy and said, would you please ask your friends to cooperate, have the longshoremen cooperate by supplying and shipping weapons, not the supplying, but shipping of weapons and arms, which was contraband. The United States, the FBI was involved in pursuing the shipment of weapons and arms. So getting back to Mr. Katina, where does Mr. Katina fit into the picture?
Yeah.
So in 1970, Doc Stacher was told me on a Friday afternoon, you'll be here for Shabbat lunch tomorrow, kid. When he's talking, you don't say, I got another appointment. Right? All right. So I'm a young kid at the time. I was, I think, 30, 31. And sure enough, I come to the hotel for a big lunch at the Sheraton Hotel. And it's got a private room and a bunch of people, social. Hello, how are you? There's one chair empty next to mine. People said, can I sit there? No, you can't sit there. That's for a friend of ours. And who walks in? Meyer Lansky. Oh, wow. That's the first and only time that I ever met the man. Wow. He sits down next to me and he engages me in a conversation. I knew your father. He was a wonderful man. He was a partner of ours at the Riviera Hotel in Havana. They made me bigger than Al Capone. I'm here. I'm trying to stay here. Son, if you see your name in the newspaper, run. Don't wait. I'm planning to stay here. And we had a wonderful conversation, philosophical. He explained to me he was a proud Jew. He didn't theologically believe in any of it, but ethnically, he was pretty, very proud and impressed with those people that were religious. Anyways,
hold on. Where do you land on that? Where he goes, ethically, I believe in it, but theologically, I don't. How did you? Well, how did you feel at the time, and how do you feel about that now?
No, it's not a question of then and now. It's a question of there are Jews who struggle, are either agnostic or atheistic, but they believe in the people, that we belong to the people, to our history. Yeah. We are a people, and we belong to the state. The creators of the state of Israel, not one of them believed in God. David Ben-Gurion, Vladimir Jabotinsky, Menachem Begin. Well, Begin, no. Begin, no. Begin had a great respect for, they all had respect for Jewish learning, tradition, Bible, and so forth. Whether they believed that God gave Moses the law on Mount Sinai, that's another question. But yeah, let's stay with this particular discussion. So at the end of the meal, everybody leaves, and Meyer Lansky and Doc Stacher said to me, son, we need to talk to you. All right. We're going to go to the corner of the hotel lobby where nobody's here, so we need to talk to you privately. So we go over there, and sure enough, sit down. Tell us about Mr. Katina. He was locked up at that time for refusing to testify to grand jury. Your listeners can find all of this. He was at Yardsville. Yeah. He was locked up for refusing to testify at the grand jury with 19 other hoodlums, or gangsters, or mobsters, for refusing after they were granted immunity. Wow. And Mr. Katina told the grand jury, you're going to have to pull me out of here dead, because I will never tell you a single thing. And sure enough, Mr. Katina did well over 5 years for refusal to testify at grand jury. Wow. So I explained to Mr. Lansky and to Mr. Stacher exactly what the legal status of the case was. And okay, Mr. Lansky stood up, shook my hand, and he said, son, it was really, really nice meeting you. And he left. And that was it. I never I never heard from Mr. Lansky again. However, putting the pieces together over the many years, sometimes in life, we don't understand who we are, what part we play, and so forth and so forth. But Mr. Stacher, the next day, he said to me, "Son, do you have any money on you?" I says, "Yeah." "How much you got?" I said, "Well, I just collected 5,700. He says, "Give me the money. Go home, see your father's partner. See Abe Green. He'll give you the money." I go home. Long story short, I go to see the old man, and he says to me, "Come back on Monday, and make it short, sweet, and right to the point. There was no money waiting for me." I said, "No money?" But Doc told me, he says, "Get out of here." Now, this was my father's best friend. Now, when you're part of Cosa Nostra, or you're part of Kosher Nostra or Cosa Nostra, you better just keep your mouth shut and follow orders. Turns out that that order didn't come from Mr. Green, who told me he couldn't give me the money. The order came from Jerry Katina, who was at Yardsville. Mr. Katina made a decision, a unilateral decision, that no money will be sent anymore to Mr. Stacher from the rake-off out of Vegas.
Why?
I'll give you the, when I find out where Mr. Katina is buried, I'll give you his address. You go to the grave and you'll ask him that question.
Good answer.
In reality, once Mr. Zwillman died, February 1959, once Mr. Lansky was no longer in the United States of America in charge of distributing the rake-off, unofficially, the king of the Jews was not a Jew. It was Jerry Katina.
Interesting.
Mr. Katina, all of the members, the Jewish members, all the Jewish mobsters were originally connected with Myron Lansky, who was connected with Lucky Luciano, who was really the father of the Genovese crime family.
Yeah.
Most of the Jews answered to the Genovese people.
Interesting.
Myron Lansky, once he and once Longy were no longer in the picture, all right? Jerry Katina emerged as the boss of the Jews.
Interesting. That could be part of the reason why the Genovese were also very strong, that they kind of had this group of guys.
They had smart Jews with connections. Remember, and if your people watch the Patrick Bet-David interview, I tell the story that Mr. Katina is the one single-handed that put together the ballet manufacturing deal of 1993.
Yeah.
All right. He's the 1963.
Oh, wow.
It was Mr. Katina that in several phone calls was able to raise the millions that was needed to take ballet manufacturing out of foreclosure, and was able to assemble the new corporation, and at the same time revolutionized the slot machine business, because Mr. Katina had the connections in Vegas for the machine to be tested. He put Mr. Green, who was an unbelievable, awesome individual, Abe Green, on an airplane, sent him to Vegas to see a gentleman by the name of Dean Martin.
Oh, wow.
And with instructions for Dean Martin, would you kindly introduce my friend Abe Green to the hotel owners in Vegas and Reno so that we could test this new slot machine called the Ballet slot machine, which incidentally was technologically refitted to have a hopper unit on it. It
Correct.
became the cause for the slot machine revolution of the casino industry, and Ballet and within a year or 2 years owned 95% of the slot machine business in Nevada.
Correct.
So Mr. Katina, he
Yeah.
made several phone calls. His first phone went to the Jewish guys, Jewish businessmen, guys that were hooked up from years before, but went on to become very successful in legitimate enterprise. That's how powerful Mr. Katina was. Now, Mr. Katina would sit in his office. You asked the question before
Yeah.
about the difference between today's bosses and the bosses years ago.
Correct.
Mr. Katina was always in a suit and tie. That office on Route 22 in Springfield and Fadham Road, all right? He sat in the corner of a desk with Christian Science Monitor in front of him, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, all right? And the Manchester Guardian. He skimmed through all the newspapers every day.
Yeah.
So he knew what was going around the world. His connections were incredible, all right? He was very successful, very entrepreneurial. In 1991, September 13th, 1991, on a Saturday night in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, the old man ordered me to sit with him at a party. Come over here, you're sitting with me, all right? Remember, I was a kid all the way going back to 1946 when Mr. Katina showed up in our lives, all right? He bought out Mr. Stature. And from that point on, I knew who Mr. Katina was. Mr. Katina, by the way, was a parishioner at the Lady of Sorrows Church on Prospect Street in South Orange, New Jersey. He was a heavy hitter within the Roman Catholic Church.
Yeah.
His kids, his 4 daughters and son, the girls went to Marylawn. They went to Catholic school. He had an incredible connection with the Catholic Church. This man was well connected. So he, low key, he was very careful, discreet with the people that he socialized with, all right? But he knew what was going on around the world. One day he comes over to me and he says to me, listen, son, do me a favor. Check with the Department of Commerce. I need to know the population. I need to know such and such. He would know his facts. He knew his statistics.
Yeah.
He knew everything. Or if he didn't know everything, he knew who to go to in order to find out everything. Now, that's a very important part of today's interview, is in the description of Mr. Katina, all right? It's not hero worship, but it certainly is admiration for a man. He told me, going back to the September 13th, 1991 party, Myron, 2 things. I was just another CEO of a major corporation.
Yeah.
And another thing, I was the only one that was given the privilege of retirement.
Good point. Good point.
To know timing, to know when your time is up.
That's another thing. Know when to get out, know when to exit. All right. So our final part of this second part series, and this is an important part of it. And he talked a little bit about it on the PBD interview, but feel free to expand on it. During World War II, when there was kind of like there was a group of Nazi sympathizers here.
Long before World War II. Tom, why don't we take a 2-minute break so I can get myself something to drink? Can you do that?
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so we're gonna kind of switch gears a little bit, and before a little break, we talk a little bit about kind of the Nazi uprising in the U.S. and how the Jewish mobsters got involved, as well as tangentially the Italian mafia as well.
Okay, so here's the real history. You had a rise in Europe of Jew hatred, of anti-Semitism. I started by telling you that after World War I, you had the rise of the National Socialist evil ideology and philosophy started by Hitler.
Nazi party.
By the way, I always said, this begs the question. When he used to meet in a place called the Osteria, it was a beer hall in Munich on Stellengasse. If I'm thinking of it right now, What if there was a Jewish mob in Munich, Germany at that time, and they knew where he was meeting with his acolytes, with his subordinates, and they were able to get in there and kill the son of a bitch? Because it's a story that's relevant to what I'm going to tell about the United States of America.
Okay.
And after World War I and the defeat of the Axis of the Kaiser Wilhelm, both the German and the Austro-Hungarian empires and the Ottoman Empire came to the United States, a large immigration. Much to a lot of people's surprise, Newark, New Jersey had a large German population, Tom. We had the best beer. We had the best water. So our beer manufacturers, we had at one time 19 breweries in Newark, New Jersey.
Ballantyne was in Newark, remember? Ballantyne?
Oh, I remember everything. Schaefer and Anheuser-Busch and so forth. We had 19 breweries because the water was very good. So going back to the middle of the 19th century, we had a large immigration of Germans. But by the way, not just German and non-Jews, but Jews as well, German Jews. We didn't have any problem. The problem starts after World War I. A large immigration comes to the United States. A bastard by the name of Fritz Kuhn, K-U-H-N. Fritz Kuhn declares himself as the Hitler of the United States of America. And he appeals to the rising anti-Semitism in the United States. What fueled anti-Semitism in the United States was 1929, the collapse of Wall Street, the Depression of 1932, 25% unemployment. And that might give you also some kind of an answer to your question earlier, what fuels anti-Semitism today? When your economics starts to suffer, who are going to blame? We need a scapegoat. So that worked as far as Europe is concerned, and it started to work here in the United States. Fritz Kuhn became an important factor, but not only Fritz Kuhn, there was rising anti-Semitism throughout the entire United States. 4 of your major anti-Semites that promoted anti-Semitism was Charles Lindbergh, Henry Ford, Joseph Kennedy, and Father Coughlin.
Wow.
The rise of Jew hatred was a poisonous spread throughout the entire United States. There was Fritz Kuhn here. There was William Dudley. Oh my goodness gracious! I can't think of his last name right now, but it'll come to me. Who was the head of an organization called the Silver Shirts. Fritz Kuhn had the brown shirts, and by the way, in England, you had the Nazis, the BUF, British United Fascist Party, which was led by I can't think of his name. It's not. I'm not going to spend time trying to think of it, but you can look. It's all in history, and I'm 84 years of age, so I get a little latitude as far as remembering details like that is concerned.
Don't worry,
but Fritz Kuhn, the major battleground in the United States starts in Newark, New Jersey, Irvington, Union, Springfield, Dover, Butler, Andover. So Fritz Kuhn, he gets a tremendous following. 1939, Madison Square Garden, you can find it on YouTube. 25,000 people jam-packed Madison Square Garden to support Fritz Kuhn and the Nazi Party in the United States.
Publicly?
1939.
Wow. No, I was saying there was like a public,
Madison Square Garden they had a gigantic event. It's all on YouTube. And there were thousands of protesters outside. Anyways, getting back to the early part of the 30s is when the Nazis would meet in Newark at the beer gardens on Springfield Avenue in Irvington. Afterwards, they'd go beat up on Jews in the old Weequahic neighborhood. So there was a prize fighter by the name of Fritz, by the name of oh my goodness gracious, my mind is really bad tonight.
No worries, Myron. I mean, just on the
Not
macro
Arno,
level.
not Arno. Well, he was a dear friend of my father's.
Yeah.
Not Arno goes to Longie's Wilman and tells him, we need to form an organization. I need a blessing from you. Longie says, go ahead. He says, beat the shit out of these Nazi bastards. And every time that the Nazis would meet at the beer gardens, our guys would go in. It's all contained in a book called The Nazis in Newark, written by a very dear friend of mine, Warren Grover. I introduced him to all of my father's friends. My father was part of that organization, major supporter, and together with his brother, Nat. And they...
Wow, yeah.
So the Minutemen went in and beat him up. Meyer Lansky was asked by Judge Nathan Perlman in New York to do the same thing to the Nazis when they were meeting up in Yorkville on Amsterdam Avenue or 3rd Avenue. 3rd Avenue and 85th, 86th Street was the nucleus of the German community in Manhattan. And our guys, Meyer Lansky, went in and with a crew of guys. And by the way, Lucky Luciano came to Meyer Lansky. Again, understand the mentality of the Jewish mob. It wasn't just alone of the question of making money illegally. It was a certain pride, all right? Just like in the Italian neighborhoods, all right? When you had a problem, who did you go to? You went to the Godfather and Godfather, I got a problem. So could I get an expeditious judicial resolution?
Yep.
Your mob was not just limited to the question of we make money. In the case of the Jews, by the way, Lucky Luciano offered to Meyer Lansky as many of my guys that you need in order to beat up those Nazis. And Meyer Lansky, who was a Jewish patriot, says to Lucky Luciano, said to him, thank you, Charlie, but I'm going to resolve this as a Jewish problem and I need to resolve it with Jewish fists. And went in exclusively with Jews and beat the crap out of the Nazis in Yorkville. Dave Berman, who was a gangster in St. Paul, Minneapolis, together with Yudi Bloom and with the King Khan and Sam Turan and Herman Pastor, they beat up Dudley, William Dudley, the guy that I mentioned who was the head of the Silver Shirts in St. Paul and Minneapolis.
Yeah.
By the way, in Chicago, you had the Jewish mob that was led by a lot of guys that were connected with Al Capone, and they beat up the anti-Semites, the Nazis in Chicago. When I tell people, one of the hitters, one of the sluggers, was a fellow by the name of Jacob Rubinstein. People say, Myron, who's Jacob? Who the hell is Jacob Rubinstein? I said, well, if I make it a little bit easier, I'm sure you'll recognize Jack Ruby.
Oh,
holy shit, Jack Ruby. Jack Ruby was a Jewish patriot. He helped beat up the anti-Semites in Chicago. He worked with Barney Ross, Triple Crown prize fighter, champion, hero at Guadalcanal and so forth.
wow.
And people were shocked when I told them Jack Ruby was a patriot, a Jewish patriot, all right? Everybody, of course, knows who Jack Ruby is and so forth. But this was an ongoing event that took place throughout the entire United States, including, by the way, Los Angeles. Eventually, of course, once the war started, once Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941, the next day, Roosevelt declared war on Japan. And in turn, the Axis of Germany and Italy declared war on the United States. Now there was another event called Operation Underworld, which people don't know about. But there was a very famous ship called the SS Normandy, which was a French luxury ship that was commissioned by the United States Department of Navy immediately after World War II began.
Yeah.
And it was commissioned by the Department of Navy to be refitted to ship and send troops to Europe to fight the Germans, the Nazis. That ship was mysteriously blew up in the port of New York. It sunk. Charles Heffenden, Department of Navy, I'm going to make the story a little short. It reached out for Moses Polikoff, the attorney from Lucky Luciano Myerlansky, requested a meeting with Myerlansky. Charlie Lucky Luciano at that time was up on the border of Canada, in prison, and the Department of Navy. It's all contained in a book written by a fellow by the name of Campbell called Operation Underworld. Well, the Myerlansky reached out to Lucky Luciano, met with them, and told him that we need to be patriots without any promise as far as Mr. Luciano at that time was incarcerated. We're not going to, there's no deal on the table. You're going to do it because you're a patriot. We need the cooperation of the longshoremen to protect against espionage and sabotage in the port of New York.
Correct.
Lucky Luciano sent the message to Saxlanza, who was in charge, together with Eddie McGrath, and they got the cooperation. Whether in fact they were effective, they were not effective. Myerlansky, I believe, wound up with a Medal of Honor for his cooperation.
Really?
Lucky Luciano eventually was pardoned by the governor of the state of New York, who was the prosecutor who sent him to jail on false charges of prostitution, by the name of Thomas Dewey.
Wait, Dewey? I didn't know Dewey pardoned him.
He pardoned him on the condition he not remain in the United States.
That must have pissed him off lovely.
Well, it was the Department of Navy that leaned on Tom Dewey, but Dewey also, when he was the prosecutor, cooperated with Charles Heffenden, who was the chief intelligence officer of the United States Navy, that said that we need the mob's cooperation. Oh, it's all contained in a book called Operation Underworld. Now, that same Operation Underworld extended to Sicily because the invasion of Europe took place in Sicily.
Correct.
All right. The mob played a very effective role. The mob in the United States and the mob in Sicily, at the request of Lucky Luciano. And by the way, Vito Genovese was there at that time, but Genovese.
But he was also working for Mussolini at the time.
But not necessarily working for Mussolini. He was working for Genovese. Mussolini was anti-mafia. He was a northern Italian.
Correct.
That really had no use for the mafia, and the mafia had no use for him.
Yeah, but then why did he hire Genovese? Because he had the Iron Prefect Cesare Morti went in and dismantled the mob, and then Genovese went to Italy and went to work for El Duce. I never understood that.
He might have claimed that he worked for Mussolini, or Mussolini may have claimed that, or history may have written that he claimed, but Vito Genovese was making money for Vito Genovese when he was there.
Yeah, true.
I think that Vito Genovese left the United States over a potential homicide case, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, was my understanding.
Okay, so he wasn't Lucky Luciano in this particular case, who had the power to send a message to the mob, to the mafia in Sicily, and said, "We need your cooperation." Right?
Got it. So then,
and everybody in the south part of Italy, in Sicily, Calabria, Naples, Apulia, Varese, and so forth. Everybody, if you had a little postcard, if you had a picture, if you had a description, you submitted it to intelligence, so that when when the Allied forces invaded via Sicily, all right, we had a gigantic advantage of knowing every blade of grass that grew in southern Italy, where the mountains were, where the valleys were, where the trees were, where this was. It was a fantastic, fantastic operation, the cooperation of the natives. And then the other thing, of course, is that after the war was over, I started to tell you that the Jewish mob played a tremendous role in the supply of weapons and arms, contrary to the Neutrality Act, that was a criminal act that was invoked by Truman, who, by the way, was the guy that the president of the United States, who recognized the state of Israel, but actually set it up for destruction because we didn't have a bullet to fire in order to defend ourselves. The minute that Ben-Gurion declared the state of Israel, the next day, the 5 or 6 Arab armies of Iraq, Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, and so forth invaded Israel.
Yeah.
We were only 600,000 Jews at that time. Half of them were bones, had been survivors of the Holocaust.
Yeah.
It's a miracle. It's a miracle of miracles. However, thank God, Israel was able to survive.
So hold on, I want to, because we're gonna be wrapping up soon. Give us a little bit. Let's cut, and we're gonna continue. We're gonna do it. We're gonna do a part 3. I can listen to Myron talk forever. It's a meaningful conversation, a meaningful discussion. But we'll leave a little bit for part 3. But just kind of wrap up what happened when Meyer Lansky got, kind of suppressed. And did he just kind of, beat up some Nazis, or did he work to suppress Nazism here in the U.S.?
Well, no, he had that. He had 1 or 2 incidents up in Yorkville, but the major factor of the real patriotism of Meyer Lansky was Operation Underworld, where he went and saw Lucky Luciano in jail, in Dannemore prison up in.
Yes.
So he told Lucky Luciano, "There's no deal here. Either we're going to be patriots or we're not patriots." And Lucky Luciano agreed to be patriot.
Wow.
Because the Department of Navy was concerned. Who are your longshoremen? It's split between 2 peoples. One group of people, Italians. The other group are the Irish.
Yeah.
So the Italians answered to Sox Lanza. However, the Department of Navy is concerned of the Italian sense of loyalty. Would they be loyal to Mussolini, or were they? And of course, they were never loyal to Mussolini. But the Department of Navy was concerned about that. On the other hand, the Irish longshoremen, will they be loyal to the war effort because they hate the British? All right. And Eddie McGrath, who was the boss of the Irish, made sure that we were, both the Irish and Sox Lanza made sure that the Italians, under the orders of Lucky Luciano. Now, again, whether it was circumstantial that there was never again a problem of sabotage and espionage and so forth, the truth of the matter is that by circumstances, Lucky Luciano was a hero.
Yeah.
Meyer Lansky was a hero.
Yeah.
Of course, he gave his full pledge. As far as fighting the American Nazi Party was concerned, the main event, the main battleground, was here in Newark, New Jersey.
That's correct.
Under the auspices of Longey's Wellman and a prize fighter by the name of Nat Arno. The participation of the Jewish mob was most effective. And besides the mob, every Jew answered to Abner Longey's Wellman. If you were a Jew in Newark, New Jersey, if you were a Jew in northern New Jersey, you answered to Longey. No ands, ifs, or buts. He was your Robin Hood.
Yeah.
He was your hero. He was your leader. All right.
Interesting. Well, listen, I don't want to give too much today. This was a part 2. We're going to do a part 3 soon. Myron and I are both in New Jersey. So we're going to try to do it in person if I can get away from the house for a minute. But Myron and I will work on that. I'm going to put a link below for the PVD video. That was excellent that you did with Patrick Bet David. So Myron, I'm going to give you the time for the parting words. I appreciate your time. I love these meaningful discussions. I love history. I love that you're giving some great knowledge on different aspects, not just Cosa Nostra, but also American history and so forth. So I'll have you.
Listen. When you live a colorful life outside of the borders of so-called legitimacy, right? It's another world.
Yeah.
I'll never forget, there was an old timer from up in the Fort Lee area by the name of Joe Pepe Zapato. Okay. Joe little Pepe, everybody knew him. He was with, going all the way back, Joe Adonis. Everybody knew him. I used to see him once a week. He was always together with Louis Streaky. We would meet at Carpen's Delicatessen on the border between Passaic and Clifton. All right, that was an automatic. Once a week, we'd go there, the round table, you'd sit, and if you just listened, these were the greatest teachers on the face of the earth. I told Patrick Bet David,
Yeah.
I'll tell the same thing here. You can go to the best universities.
Yeah.
You can go to Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Wharton School of Business. Go to the best schools on the face of the earth. If you sit with mob guys, right, and just listen, understand who they are and what they are. I told a story today where when I was a kid, I went to pick up that 5700. And I was told, come back Monday. Come back Monday. What are you doing here? I'm here for that 5700. What 5700? Get out of here. Aren't you supposed to be in Africa fixing those machines, bally slot machines for us? Get out. Call me when you get back from Africa. Right? And that's it. So we understood years later that the order came, it came from Yardsville Prison. Use our young, let's put it like this.
Yeah.
Myron Sugarman was like a son to these people. So we're going to use our son as the pigeon to send a message to Tel Aviv, Israel, that the faucet was turned off on the rake off out of Vegas. Now, Tommy Lavecchia says, Myron, what was the reason for that? Right? Yeah. How are you going to second guess these foxes? Right? They're foxes.
Yeah.
There's a Talmudic learning, the Talmudic education, the great wisdom of the sages for centuries. And one of the remarks is, when the fox has its hour, man bows his head. When you're up against powerful forces that you know are powerful, and you're not in a position to argue, bow your head and bide your time.
Good point.
And bite your tongue.
I love it.
Maybe even if you don't like what you're swallowing, you might have to swallow and you might have to smile.
I love it. I love it, Myron. Myron, listen, I got to be honest with you.
Last words of wisdom.
I got to be honest. If you're watching this long, and this isn't for everybody, to be honest with you, I'm not going to be worried about views for this one. This is some stuff that you're giving us gold. It's an honor. It's a privilege. And just watch this, give a like, put your notification on, make sure you enable all notifications. Check out the merch store, put a link below, help support the podcast. Myron, thank you so much for being on the Armchair MBA in part 2.
Okay, Tommy, thank you for having me. And I look forward to session number 3. All right.
My pleasure.